beautiful souls. Welcome back to another episode of Energize Your Passion, where we dive deep into topics that light up our lives and fuel our inner fire. I'm your host, Sunshine, and today we're talking about something that touches all of us at some point in our lives. How much information should you share with family, friends, and others? Now, I know this can be a tricky subject, but don't worry, we're going to navigate it together with positivity, insight, and maybe a few laughs along the way. Before we jump in, I want to thank each one of you for being here. Whether you're tuning in on your morning walk, doing your commute, or just chilling at home, I appreciate you. I really appreciate you. Remember, this space is all about positive energy and helping each other grow. So if you're ready to explore this topic, grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. Segment 1, why do we share? All right, let's kick things off by talking about why we share information in the first place. Sharing is a fundamental part of human connection. Think about it. When was the last time you shared something with someone close to you? Was it something lighthearted, like what you had for lunch, or something deeper, like a challenge you're facing? We share for many reasons. Sometimes it's because we want to feel closer to someone, to build that bridge of trust and understanding. Other times it's to seek advice, validation, or simply to vent. But have you ever stopped to think about what drives you to share? Are you looking for support, empathy, or just someone to listen? Understanding your motivation for sharing is the first step in figuring out how much you should share. If you're sharing because you're seeking comfort or advice, it's important to choose the right person. Someone who can offer what you need without judgment. But there's a flip side to sharing too much. Oversharing can sometimes strain relationships, especially if the person on the receiving end isn't equipped to handle the information. It's like that old saying, too much of a good thing can be bad. So how do we find that balance? That's what we're going to explore today. Before we dive deeper, let's reflect on why we share. Think about a time when you shared something personal with someone. How did it make you feel? Did it bring you closer, or did it create a distance? Understanding these moments can help guide you in future interactions. I want to share a story from one of our listeners, Emily, who wrote in about her experience with sharing. Emily says, I used to share everything with my best friend. We were like sisters. I like to tell her about my day, my frustrations at work, even my relationship issues. At first, it felt great to have someone to confide in. But over time, I noticed that our conversations were starting to feel one-sided. I was doing all the sharing, and she wasn't opening up much at all. It started to feel like I was overwhelming her with my problems. Eventually, we drifted apart, and I realized that maybe I was sharing too much, too often, without considering how it might be affecting her. Emily's story is a great example of how important it is to be mindful of our sharing. It's easy to get caught up in the moment and unload everything on someone, especially when we're going through a tough time. But as Emily learned, even the closest of friendships can be strained if we don't consider the impact our sharing might have on the other person. This brings up a crucial point. When we share, we're not just transferring information. We're also transferring emotions. The weight of our worries, our joys, our frustrations, all of that is being passed along to the person we're sharing with. It's important to ask ourselves, is this person in a place where they can handle what I'm sharing? Are they emotionally available? Or might this conversation burden them in a way that I didn't intend? Let's take a moment to think about this from the other side. Imagine you're the one receiving all this information. How does it feel when someone continuously shares their worries and problems with you? Do you feel closer to them, or do you start to feel overwhelmed? I received another message from a listener, Julia, who had an experience that might resonate with many of you. My cousin and I have always been close. She's like a sister to me, and I've always felt comfortable talking to her about anything. But over the past year, I've been going through some personal issues, and I found myself constantly turning to her for support. At first, she was there for me, but I started to notice that she was becoming distant. She wasn't responding to my texts as quickly, and when we did talk, she seemed distracted. It wasn't until I asked her directly that she told me she was feeling overwhelmed by everything I was sharing. She didn't know how to help me, and it was making her feel anxious. It made me realize that I needed to be more mindful of how much I was sharing and to remember that she had her own life and problems too. Julia's story is a powerful reminder that while sharing can bring us closer to others, it can also create unintended burdens. It's a delicate balance. On one hand, we want to be open and honest with the person we care about. But on the other hand, we need to be mindful of their emotional capacity. So how do we find that balance? One approach is to check in with the person before you start sharing. A simple, is now a good time to talk? Or, do you have the emotional space for this? Can go a long way. It shows that you respect their time and their feelings, and it gives them the opportunity to set boundaries if they need to. Another key factor is understanding your own motivation for sharing. Are you looking for advice, validation, or just someone to listen? Knowing this can help you choose the right person to talk to. For instance, if you're seeking advice, it might be better to talk to someone who's experienced in the area you're struggling with. If you just need to vent, a close friend who's a good listener might be the better choice. But what about those times when you're not sure why you're sharing? Have you ever found yourself oversharing in a moment of stress or anxiety, only to regret it later? This is something many of us have experienced, and it often comes from a place of needing immediate relief from our emotions. Let's hear from another listener, David, who shared his story with us. I was going through a tough breakup a few years ago, and I found myself constantly talking about it with anyone who would listen. I was hurting and I just needed to get it out. But after a while, I realized I was oversharing with people who weren't really equipped to help me. Some of them started avoiding me. I even lost a few friendships because of it. Looking back, I realized that I was using sharing as a way to cope with my pain, but I wasn't being mindful of how it was affecting others. David's story is one that many of us can relate to. When we're in pain, sharing can feel like a release valve. It helps us get things off our chest and can make us feel less alone. But if we're not careful, we might end up pushing people away instead of bringing them closer. This is where self-awareness comes in. It's important to recognize when we're sharing from a place of desperation or anxiety, and to pause and ask ourselves if this is the right person or the right time for this conversation. Sometimes it might be more helpful to write down our thoughts, talk to a therapist, or engage in another form of self-care before reaching out to others. Now I'd like to shift gears a bit and talk about the flip side of this. When we don't share enough, not sharing can be just as problematic as oversharing, especially in close relationships where openness is key to building trust and intimacy. Another listener, Hannah, shared her experience with us. I've always been a pretty private person, and I tend to keep things to myself. Even when I'm going through something tough, I usually try to deal with it on my own. But last year, I went through a really difficult time, and I didn't tell anyone about it. I thought I could handle it by myself, but eventually it all became too much. I ended up having a breakdown, and that's when I finally reached out to my friends for support. They were so understanding and supportive, but they were also hurt that I hadn't come to them sooner. It made me realize that by not sharing, I was actually shutting people out and depriving them of the opportunity to be there for me. Hannah's story highlights an important point. Sometimes, by not sharing, we're not protecting ourselves or others. We're actually creating distance and isolation. In close relationships, sharing is a way to let people in, to show them that we trust them with our vulnerabilities. When we withhold information, especially during tough times, we might unintentionally send the message that we don't trust them or that we don't need them. So, how do we strike that balance between sharing too much and not sharing enough? It comes down to a combination of self-awareness, empathy, and communication. We need to be aware of our own emotional state and motivations, empathetic to the needs and capabilities of others, and communicate about what we're going through and what we need from those around us. To wrap up this segment, let's reflect on the question we started with. Why do we share? Is it out of habit, or is there a deeper reason? Understanding your own motivations and being mindful of how your sharing affects others can help you navigate your relationships with more intention and care. As we move into our next segment, keep this question in mind. What is your motivation for sharing? Are you seeking connection, validation, or maybe just a listening ear? Whatever the reason, being aware of it can help you make more intentional choices about how and when to share. Segment 2, recognizing boundaries. Now that we've talked about why we share, let's move on to something just as important, recognizing boundaries. Boundaries are like invisible lines that define what is acceptable for us and others in terms of sharing. But here's the thing. Boundaries are different for everyone. What feels comfortable for you might not be the same for someone else. And that's okay because boundaries are deeply personal. They're shaped by our experiences, our personalities, and even our cultural backgrounds. So how do you know when you're crossing a boundary or when someone might be crossing yours? It all comes down to communication and awareness. Setting and respecting boundaries is a skill, one that requires patience, practice, and sometimes a little bit of courage. Let's start with the personal boundaries. These are the limits you set for yourself in terms of what you're willing to share. Maybe you're an open book with your best friend, but you prefer to keep certain details private when talking to acquaintances or even some family members. That's perfectly okay. Your comfort level is your guide, and it's essential to listen to your instincts when deciding how much to share and with whom. But here's where it gets tricky. What happens when someone in your life expects you to share more than you're comfortable with? Maybe it's a parent who wants to know every detail of your life, or a friend who overshares and expects the same from you. It can be challenging to navigate these situations without hurting feelings or creating tension. The key is to assert your boundaries gently but firmly. You can say something like, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to talk about that right now. Or, I prefer to keep this private for now, but I'll share when I'm ready. It's all about finding the right balance between honesty and tact. Let's explore the ideal with a story from one listener, Sarah, who wrote in about her experience with setting boundaries. My mom and I have always been close, but as I've gotten older, I've noticed that she still wants to know everything about my life. Just like when I was a teenager, she'll ask me about my relationships, my finances, even my work stress in a way that sometimes feels intrusive. At first, I would answer her questions because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But over time, I started to feel uncomfortable and resentful. I realized that I needed to set some boundaries to protect my own privacy. So I had a conversation with her where I gently explained that while I love our talks, there are certain things I prefer to keep private. It wasn't easy, and she was a bit hurt at first, but eventually she understood and respected my wishes. Now our conversations are much more comfortable for both of us, and I feel more in control of what I choose to share. Sarah's story is a perfect example of how setting boundaries, even with someone as close as a parent, can lead to healthier and more respectful relationships. It's not about shutting people out. It's about creating a space where both parties feel comfortable and respected. But setting boundaries isn't always easy, especially when it comes to people who have been a big part of our lives for a long time. Sometimes it can feel like we're betraying them or being selfish by not sharing everything. However, it's important to remember that boundaries are a form of self-care. They allow us to maintain our emotional well-being and ensure that our relationships are built on mutual respect and understanding. Now let's talk about recognizing when someone else is setting a boundary with you. This can sometimes be tricky because boundaries aren't always verbalized. They can be expressed through body language, tone of voice, or even changes in behavior. For example, if someone seems hesitant to engage in a certain conversation or they avoid certain topics, that might be their way of signaling a boundary. I received a message from another listener, Tom, who had an experience with recognizing and respecting a friend's boundary. A few years ago, one of my closest friends went through a really tough divorce. Naturally, I wanted to be there for him and offer my support. So I would ask him about it regularly, thinking I was helping. But over time, I noticed that he started to withdraw whenever the topic came up. One day he finally told me that while he appreciated my concern, he wasn't ready to talk about the details of his divorce yet. I felt terrible for pushing him to talk about something he wasn't comfortable with. It made me realize that sometimes the best way to support someone is by giving them space and respecting their boundaries, even if they don't explicitly ask for it. Tom's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our good intentions can lead us to cross boundaries without even realizing it. It's crucial to pay attention to the cues that others give us and to respect their need for space. even if it's not something we would choose for ourselves. Supporting someone doesn't always mean prying into their personal life. It can also mean simply being there for them in whatever capacity they need. Let's take a moment to think about the relationships in our life. Are there boundaries that need to be set or clarified? How do you feel when someone crosses your boundaries? And how do you respond? These are important questions to ask yourself as we continue this conversation. Setting boundaries isn't just about protecting yourself, it's also about creating a healthy dynamic where others feel respected and valued. It's about understanding that we all have different comfort levels when it comes to sharing, and that's okay. For some, it might be easier to talk about certain topics, while for others, those same topics might be off limits. What's important is that we communicate our boundaries clearly and respect the boundaries of others, even if they're different from our own. Another aspect of recognizing boundaries is understanding that they can change over time. What you were comfortable with sharing a year ago might not be the same today, and that's completely normal. As we grow and change, so do our boundaries. It's important to regularly check in with yourself and the people in your life to make sure that everyone's boundaries are being respected. One listener, Lisa, shared how her boundaries have evolved over time and how she navigated those changes with her close friends. When I was younger, I was an open book. I would share everything with my friends, from my relationships to my career struggles. But as I've gotten older, I've become more selective about what I share and with whom. It's not that I don't trust my friends, but I've realized that not every detail of my life needs to be shared. Some things are just for me. At first, this was a bit of an adjustment for my friends because they were used to me being an open book, because they were used to me being so open. I had to have some conversations where I explained that I wasn't trying to be distant or secretive. I just needed to keep certain things private. Thankfully, they understood and respected my decision, and our friendships have continued to grow stronger because of that mutual respect. Lisa's story beautifully illustrates how our boundaries can shift as we move through different stages of life. It's a natural part of personal growth, and it's something we should embrace rather than resist. Our boundaries are a reflection of who we are and what we need at any given moment. But what happens when someone doesn't respect your boundaries? This can be one of the most challenging aspects of setting limits, especially if the person is someone close to you. It's important to remember that you have a right to have your boundaries, even if someone else disagrees with them. Standing firm in your boundaries is not about being rigid or unkind. It's about honoring yourself and your needs. I want to share another listener story, this time from a woman named Jessica, who faced a situation where her boundaries were not respected. I've always been close with my sister, but she has a habit of prying into my personal life in ways that make me uncomfortable. For years, I would just go along with it to avoid conflict, even though it made me feel uneasy. But after a particularly invasive question about my relationship, I decided that enough was enough. I calmly told her that while I love her and value our relationship, there are certain things I'm not comfortable discussing. She didn't take it well at first and accused me of being secretive. It was a tough conversation, but I stood my ground. Over time, she began to understand and has since become more respectful of my boundaries. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it for my own peace of mind. Jessica's experience highlights the importance of standing up for your boundaries, even when it's difficult. It's natural for people to push back when they're used to having access to certain parts of your life. But that doesn't mean you have to give in. Your boundaries are yours to define, and it's okay to enforce them, even if it means having uncomfortable conversations. Boundaries are essential for maintaining healthy, respectful relationships. They allow us to preserve our sense of self while still engaging in meaningful connections with others. But they're not just about saying no or shutting people out. They're also about creating space for open, honest communication about what we need and what we're comfortable with. Let's also remember that boundaries are a two-way street. Just as we have the right to set our own boundaries, we also have the responsibility to respect the boundaries of others. This means listening when someone says they're not comfortable sharing something and not pressuring them to open up if they're not ready. As we move into our next segment, we'll talk about how to decide when and how much to share. This is where we'll really get into the nitty-gritty of navigating these complex situations. But before we do, I want to leave you with a final thought on boundaries. Setting and respecting boundaries is an act of love. That's right. Setting and respecting boundaries is an act of love, both for yourself and for the people in your life. It's about creating a safe, respectful environment where everyone's needs are honored and valued. So take a moment to reflect on your own boundaries. Are there areas where you need to set clear limits? Are there relationships where you need to have a conversation about respecting boundaries? Remember, it's never too late to start setting boundaries that protect your well-being and foster healthier connections. I hope you found this segment insightful and helpful in thinking about the role that boundaries play in our relationships and how they can shape the way we share with others. As we continue our discussion in the next segment, we'll dive deeper into the decisions we make about sharing. How much, when, and with whom. Stay tuned and remember, your boundaries are your right. They are a crucial part of how you maintain your sense of self while navigating the complex dynamic of your relationships. Segment 3, when and how much to share. Okay, so we've talked about why we share and the importance of recognizing boundaries. Now let's get into the heart of the matter. When and how much to share. This is where things can get a little tricky because there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It really depends on the context, the person you're talking to, and what you hope to achieve by sharing. First, let's talk about timing. Timing is crucial when it comes to sharing information. Have you ever been in a situation where someone shared something really heavy with you at the wrong time? Maybe you were in the middle of a busy day, or you just weren't in the right headspace to handle it. Timing can make a huge difference in how information is received and how it impacts the relationship. So before you share, ask yourself, is this the right time? Am I in the right mindset? Is the person I'm sharing with in the right space to receive this information? These questions can help you determine whether now's the right moment to open up. Next, let's talk about how much to share. This is where understanding your audience is key. First example, with close families or friends, you might feel more comfortable sharing details about your life. But with coworkers, acquaintances, or even certain family members, you might want to be more selective. A good rule of thumb is to start small. Share a little and see how the other person responds. Are they engaged and supportive, or do they seem uncomfortable or disinterested? This can give you a clue about whether it's safe to share more or if you should hold back. And remember, you don't have to share everything all at once. Sometimes it's okay to keep certain things private, at least until you feel more comfortable or the timing is right. It's all about finding that balance between being open and protecting your own emotional well-being. Take a moment to think about your own experiences. Have you ever shared something and later regretted it? Or maybe you held back and wish you had shared more. These moments can teach us a lot about our own boundaries and how we navigate our relationships. In our next segment, we'll dive into the tough conversations, how to handle them, how to stay true to yourself, and how to maintain positive energy even when things get challenging. Segment 4, navigating tough conversations. Now let's talk about the tough stuff. Those difficult conversations where the stakes are high, emotions are involved, and you're not sure how much to share. We've all been there, right? Whether it's discussing a sensitive issue with a family member, or setting boundaries with a friend, or confronting a coworker, these conversations can be really challenging. But here's the good news. With the right approach, you can navigate these tough conversations with grace and confidence. The first thing to remember is to stay calm and centered. When emotions are running high, it's easy to get caught up in the moment and say things you might later regret. Take a deep breath, ground yourself, and approach the conversation with a clear mind. Next, be honest but tactful. It's important to express your feelings and share your perspective, but it's equally important to do so in a way that's respectful and considerate of the other person's feelings. You can say something like, I want to share something with you, and it's important to me that we have an open and honest conversation. Another key point is to listen as much as you talk. Tough conversations are a two-way street. Make sure you're giving the other person space to share their thoughts and feelings as well. This not only shows that you respect their perspective, but also help create a more balanced and productive conversation. And finally, be prepared to set boundaries if necessary. If the conversation starts to veer into territory that makes you uncomfortable, it's okay to say, I'm not ready to discuss this right now, or let's take a break and revisit this later. It's all about maintaining your own emotional well-being while still being open to meaningful dialogue. Think about a tough conversation you've had recently. How did it go? What would you do differently next time? These experiences can teach us a lot about ourselves and how we communicate with others. In our final segment, we'll talk about the importance of self-reflection and how it plays a crucial role in deciding how much to share with others. Segment 5, the role of self-reflection. As we wrap up our discussion today, I want to talk about something that's often overlooked but incredibly important: self-reflection. Self-reflection is the process of looking inward, understanding your own thoughts and feelings, and using that insight to guide your actions and decisions. When it comes to sharing information with others, self-reflection plays a crucial role. Before you share, take a moment to ask yourself, why do I want to share this? What do I hope to achieve? Am I sharing this for the right reasons? Self-reflection can also help you understand your own boundaries and triggers. Maybe there are certain topics that you find difficult to talk about, Or perhaps you've noticed that you tend to overshare when you're feeling stressed or anxious. Recognizing these patterns can help you make more conscious decisions about how much to share and with whom. And remember, self-reflection isn't just about looking back. It's also about looking forward. It's about setting intentions for how you want to communicate in the future and being mindful of the impact your words can have on your relationships. So as you go about your day, take some time to reflect on your own sharing habits. Are there areas where you could set clear boundaries? Are there relationships where you could be more open and honest? Use this insight to guide your interactions moving forward. Self-reflection is a powerful tool, and it's something that we can all benefit from. It helps us grow, understand ourselves better, and build stronger, healthier relationships. Wow, we have covered a lot today, haven't we? From understanding why we share to recognizing boundaries, deciding when and how much to share, navigating tough conversations, and the importance of self-reflection. Each of these pieces is crucial in finding the right balance in our relationships. I hope today's episode has given you some valuable insights and tools that you can use in your own life. Remember, it's all about balance. Sharing is a beautiful way to connect with others, but it's also important to protect your own emotional well-being and respect the boundaries of those around you. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a few key points to remember. Number 1, understand your motivation for sharing. Number 2, be mindful of your own boundaries and those of others. Number 3, choose the right time and amount of information to share. Number 4, approach tough conversations with honesty, respect, and an open mind. And number 5, reflect on your sharing habits and make conscious choices moving forward. As always, I love to hear from you, how you navigate sharing information with those around you. What challenges have you faced? And what have you learned? Share your thoughts with me on social media or leave a comment on the blog. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating or sharing it with someone who might benefit from this conversation. Your support helps us continue to bring positive energy and valuable content to our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Remember, you have the power to energize your passion and create the life you want. Until next time, stay positive, stay motivated, and keep shining your beautiful light. With love and gratitude, I'm Sunshine, signing off.